What would you add to costs and fees if I were just adding another master bedroom suite to my house, right? That's exactly what you should be charging, to put a tiny home, for example, in the backyard. Shouldn't treat it as if it's a whole new house. I mean, that makes no sense.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 285 with Dan Fitzpatrick. As the president of THIA and the director of government relations for the American Tiny House Association, Dan is at the forefront of the movement to legalize tiny homes as a viable housing option in the United States. In today's episode, we'll dive into the progress being made in legalizing tiny homes, the collaboration between Tiny Home Industry Association and the International Code Council, and the challenges faced in navigating zoning constraints for placing tiny houses. We'll also discuss the importance of working with local leaders to bring about change, as well as Dan's work with Vera Struck and the introduction of a bill to legalize tiny homes in Massachusetts. Whether you're a tiny house enthusiast or simply curious about the movement, this episode will provide valuable insights into the future of legal tiny homes. So sit back, relax, and let's get started with Dan Fitzpatrick. I asked John and Finn Kernahan of United Tiny House Association what they love about their precision temp hot water heaters, and here's what they told me.
Hey, Ethan, this is John and Finn Kernahan with United Tiny House Association.
We organize Tiny House Festival.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
First and foremost.
We have a total of 3 precision temp on-demand hot water heaters. The thing we really like about these, and folks know this, I think they picked this up on Finn and I, if we don't like something, you'll never hear us talk about it. So the 2 things we noticed that we noticed and experienced immediately, they took painstaking effort to make sure that it was done right and installed. And so that was pretty cool right there. The other thing is the continuous on-demand hot water that just ran forever without any fluctuations or anything. I can't imagine an application, especially in our environment and our lifestyle of being the nomad, transportable, mobile, tiny lifestyle where one of these units aren't good to use.
Right now, Precision Temp is offering $100 off any unit plus free shipping when you use the coupon code THLP. So head over to precisiontemp.com and use the coupon code THLP at checkout for $100 off any unit. That's PRECISION temp.com, coupon code THLP. Thank you so much to Precision Temp for sponsoring our show. All right, I am here with Dan Fitzpatrick. Dan is the THIA president and the director of government relations for the American Tiny House Association. Working with these organizations during the past several years, he has made numerous presentations to state and local governments throughout North America. He wrote and processed the ordinance amendments that legalized movable tiny homes as ADUs in Fresno, San Luis Obispo, Los Angeles, San Jose, and Santa Clara County in California. Additionally, he worked on state law changes in Washington, Oregon, Florida, New Hampshire, California, and Maine, and continues to consult with local tiny home advocates. Dan Fitzpatrick, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been a while since I've been on.
Yeah, it has been a while, and you've been busy.
Yeah, no, things are very busy with the Tiny Home Industry Association as we work with state and municipalities around the nation to legalize tiny homes. As you well know, a lot of that is just an education of what tiny homes are, especially the ones on wheels, and to get acceptance of them. And I remember starting to work on this back in 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
And you could barely get anyone's attention to even talk to you.
Yeah.
And now it's sort of the flavor of the day. Everyone wants to talk to us about it.
Yeah.
And a lot is happening.
It's funny. There was this article in Wired magazine maybe a month or 2 ago that the headline was like, "What happened to the tiny house movement?" And it kind of pronounced the tiny house movement as being like dead and done. And it was a bad article. And when I read it, I just thought, well, actually, it's just heating up, or the real work, after the flash in the pan of the reality TV shows and the kind of kitschy, novel tiny house stuff, there's actually been real progress at making tiny houses a viable legal housing option in multiple states in the country.
Yeah, I read the same article, and it was very poorly written, very badly researched, and because
Yeah.
years ago the big issue was how to build tiny homes, and most of our builders were working out of their garage. They were lucky if they did two a year.
Yeah.
Now we're up to most of our builders. Many of them that started out 8 years ago are building anywhere from 50 to 100 a year.
Yeah.
Are also building to not only the what we call the ANSI standards, but are now moving into both modular and HUD
Mm-hmm.
code type units for their builds.
Okay.
So the industry is very alive and well, and we're moving into more and more of tiny home communities springing up all over the country.
Yeah, and that's exciting because I think that the model of somebody, potentially buying their own land or finding somebody's backyard to rent, that is still, in my opinion, a very viable way of living tiny, but the numbers, it's not going to scale enough to meet the demand. And so, when you can take a piece of land and put 20 or 50 or 100 tiny houses on it, that's going to get us there a lot sooner.
Yeah, the scale is important not only for our users, but for our builders. The more number of units they are able to build, each year, they can then buy in bulk. It'll drive the cost of units down.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that happening more and more now across the nation.
So do you think the prices of tiny houses are coming down now as a result of all the builders entering the fray and the legalization efforts?
Let's put it this way. The answer is yes and no to that. On one hand, inflation, especially after the pandemic, increased units that were selling, let's say 65 to 75 are now 85 to 95, right?
Okay.
But because they are now building at scale, that's been trimmed. I mean, it's sort of stopped there. It's not increased, or if people were still building at the scale they were 5-6 years ago, the inflation rate for units would be even higher today. So, fortunately, some of the supply chain issues we've had, especially with windows, is scaling to the extent that we're able to buy in bulk and get them in a timely manner. And I think when you see various municipalities, states, and the building code regulations become very much more normalized, you'll see that scale, the economy of scale, improve dramatically.
Excellent. So I feel like there's kind of two big topics or two big things to cover. One being the ICC tiny house provisions, and then the efforts to legalize, kind of what's been happening state by state. So why don't we start with the ICC, the International Code Council, and the collaboration with THIA? Can you just, I think most people who follow this or don't follow this, their eyes glaze over when they start hearing about standards and codes. So can you kind of explain this in layman's terms? Like what does this mean? What is this?
Well, let's make it real simple. All building codes for habitable dwelling units, keyword, habitable dwelling units, are governed nationally by the International Code Council, the ICC.
Okay.
So anytime you go down to your local city municipality to get a building permit, they're issuing you a building permit based on building codes promulgated by ICC. Right? They're the gold standard nationally.
Okay.
So the Tiny Home Industry Association made a very conscious decision and effort to befriend them. Remember, back in 2016, 2017, they would barely talk to you.
Right.
Today we're collaborating. I mean, that's a big change that in 2018, we did the residential code that included tiny home provisions for Appendix Q.
Yeah.
2021, it got updated and clarified for the Appendix AQ.
Mm-hmm.
And now today we are collaborating. We actually put out a new handbook called The Tiny House Building It Right,
Mm-hmm.
of building tiny homes and tiny homes on chassis
Okay.
with ICC. I mean, can you imagine that happening 6, 7 years ago? And they even have a specific chapter in there on foundation things, peer type systems for, putting chassis, on, piece of property and tying it down. So major progress has worked with them. And why it's so important
Mm-hmm.
is once we have this new committee being formed that will create a national
Okay.
standard for the design, construction, and inspection and regulation of tiny homes on chassis.
Mm-hmm.
Once that's published, it's now being published by a authority, by ICC, that all municipalities, all states trust. And that's like putting money in the bank. It will, it will be immediately accepted and acceptable around the nation. So now we'll have one standard,
Mm-hmm.
one ability that users, builders, suppliers, etc., can now build to and scale their production.
Right. So it sounds like that helps both builders scale up, but it also helps municipalities who want to legalize tiny homes in some way because they have standards that are just they can pull right off the shelf. They don't have to invent them.
Oh, absolutely. I just gave a talk to the chief building officials from many of the municipalities in California. And they were just thrilled to hear about that there's going to be a committee and a standard for this, because they're all trying to figure out how to put round pegs in square holes. And they just want to have a simple handbook, so to speak, to go to be able to legalize, to give building permits for units that aren't built on wheels. And they all want to. I mean, trust me. I mean, it's not that they're pushing back. They're just wanting to have a clear, concise way of dealing with a unit that they get more calls on tiny homes than almost anything else on a daily basis.
Wow.
They want to work with us as much as we want to work with them to get this done.
Yeah. And if we were talking about there being a shortage of housing and a housing crisis, 6-7 years ago, then, that is like a joke compared to now, at least where I live in Vermont. I mean, the prices of homes have just continued to climb, and the demand is growing and the supply is not.
Yeah. And that's typical around the country.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be, just the certain metropolitan areas. It's now across the country. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But I think we're making tremendous progress.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, once we get through this building code standards process, hopefully it'll happen within the next 2 years. The building code issues are getting resolved very, very quickly.
Okay.
The biggest issue by far now, overseeing all of this, are zoning issues, zoning constraints.
Yes. And does this work do anything to address zoning constraints?
Well, let's put it this way. When I go talk to municipalities, the planners I talk to point to the building code guys saying they won't do it. They won't let us do it, right? And the building code guys, quite frankly, are getting upset about that because they know a lot of the issues are on the zoning side. So it takes away that crutch, and that we can now talk to the elected officials saying, hey, get on your planners to get rid of some of the silly things that are in the code, like minimum square footage for dwelling units on residential property. I mean, that's ridiculous, especially with 70% of our households now nationally are 2 or less people.
Yeah.
My God, we need studio apartments and units. We need 1-bedroom units, and tiny homes and small homes are absolutely perfect for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, I know another big barrier that people seem to face when trying to, do this type of infill work, like putting a tiny home as an accessory dwelling is dealing with water and sewage and things, because that can also often be really expensive to tie into a city's sewer system.
Yeah, and we face that in a number of places. And one of the key terms that I'm trying to educate or educate the tiny world to use when they're dealing with local government officials is the word proportionate.
Yeah.
Why are you charging us the same fees and the same process for hooking up a McMansion as it is for our little tiny home? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And that resonates.
Our little tiny home with one shower. Yeah.
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 And the way I like to phrase it is that, what would you add to costs and fees if I were just adding another master bedroom suite to my house?
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly what you should be charging, to put a tiny home, for example, in the backyard. Shouldn't treat it as if it's a whole new house. I mean, that makes no sense.
Yeah. And so there's anybody who follows, the tiny home industry in the news, has probably also heard about an ASTM committee and another standards effort. How do you view the two standards efforts?
Well, I mean, we as an organization, as the Tiny Home Industry Association, are going to continue to work with ICC, because that's where the action is. That's who is going to say yay or nay to building codes nationally over the next 20, 50 plus years. They've been doing it since I've been involved in local governments, not since 1973.
Okay.
So, yes, maybe ASTM will come up with some ideas that can be incorporated, but it'll be incorporated into the ICC code.
Mm-hmm.
And so
got it.
We're going to continue to work with the group that, let's back up a second. There's a two-step process to doing building codes.
Okay. Step
one is doing the standard. Nationally, you come up with, in essence, the publication on here's the standard.
Mm-hmm.
That, quite frankly, that's the easy part.
Okay.
The most difficult part is now getting 50 states and 30,000 municipalities to adopt it. Right?
Yeah.
And we know as an organization, the best group to be able to get it adopted is ICC. It's that simple. Because ICC is made up of the chief building officials from all 50 states and the 30,000 municipalities. They're in essence writing codes for themselves. Of course, they're going to adopt that which they were part of. So even though at times it was a slow process, we now have a very, very good collaborative working effort or program with ICC, to the extent that we were invited guests at the recent ICC Expo and Conference in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say an invited guest, they invited us to bring one of our tiny homes to be part of the expo.
Nice.
And Wind River out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, were kind enough to bring one of their units.
Okay.
And we had building officials from all across the country crawling through that thing over 3 days, trying to find something wrong with it. And it was very, very well received.
Nice.
No one could find anything wrong with it. It's the only time I've been to a expo with a tiny house that we literally had people crawling under the chassis looking at it, opening up the electrical panels.
Yeah.
Getting down under the sink to make sure the plumbing was right.
Yeah.
And so we made a lot of converts at the ICC convention.
Nice. Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite things to do at tiny home like fairs and shows, is to crawl under the tiny houses and just and make the judgment whether this house would work in the Northeast or not. Is there any plumbing underneath?
Right. Yeah, no, it's been very, very heartening to work with very professional people at ICC and working through a lot of the, issues that are unique to our, product.
Yeah.
And at this expo, we were able to run into the national experts in all the various fields to sit down and discuss with them different ways of handling these issues. And I'm
Nice.
Come December, the first week in December, ICC will announce the 18 members that will be on the committee to write the building standards for units built on chassis.
Nice. Well, that's fantastic.
And as soon as that comes out, we will publish all of the names of who's going to be involved. It's a very open and transparent process. Anyone that wants to be involved just needs to call in on the Zoom call and be involved. And I'm sure there will be a number of tiny home builders, users, suppliers on that committee. A good cross section of folks from New England to California, from Florida to Washington on that committee.
Excellent. Well, it wasn't my most recent episode, but it was the episode before that, number 283. I had Vera Struck on the show for actually the third time, but this time Vera became kind of a reluctant lobbyist and helped to really get things going in Massachusetts. And she really lauded your work and THIA's work in helping to make it happen. Can you talk about what that was like?
Yes. Now, Vera and I talked with each other. Oh my God, this goes back maybe 3 or 4 years ago about needing to do something in her backyard there in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And we've been successful, as you well know, in some other municipalities and states. Certainly up in Maine, we got a bill passed. What was it, 3 or 4 years ago now? Working with Corinne Watson and her team at Tiny Home of Maine. Anyway, Vera and I began talking, and here's the process that works well, whether it's with local government or state governments. I try to work with things on a national, basis. But to get laws changed, you have to have a very local organization to take the lead. I mean, why do people in Massachusetts want to listen to this old guy from California? They don't. They need to talk to folks that are voters.
Yeah.
And having Vera set up her task force, and when we're actually having sit-down meetings, legislators, and she tries to bring in a constituent of theirs, on the phone call. Boy, does that get their attention real quick, is that they start asking their constituent a question that they're having or problems they may be having with siting their tiny homes or the availability of affordable housing. So Vera and her team has done an outstanding job of working with us on a national level to help write the bill, get it introduced. And now I think we're up to 20, 30 plus sponsors, of the bill. And it's making great progress. And that's due to the efforts and day in and day out work of Vera on the phone with legislators, getting the meetings and lobbying for it. So it's us seniors are doing a outstanding job, certainly there in Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's a very time-consuming process. So I feel like you need to make it your full-time job almost if you're going to try to do this in your state. Just
it takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of legislators, certainly there in New England. For example, New Hampshire. Is there anyone that is not a legislator? I mean, there's tons of them.
Yeah.
And so you have to go out and find out, who are the leaders, and then work with them on getting an understanding of the law and bills. And the way we've written the proposed legislation in Massachusetts, it basically says is that in essence, a unit has 2 licenses. From the chassis down, it's something that moves the road, on the road, on the public highway. So that needs to be licensed and overseen by, in general, your Department of Motor Vehicles or Department of Transportation. From the chassis up, it needs to be built in accordance with, in general, in this case, the state of Massachusetts building code. And having that generic terminology as we're changing over the next few years, ICC rules and the state adopts them, we don't have to go back in and re-adopt or update the statute, because whatever the
Right.
Massachusetts building code is, we're already taken care of.
Right. And I think that's a really smart and innovative way to do it, and to make it so that this law doesn't have to keep getting updated all the time.
Yeah, we're doing a very similar bill in Florida. We just did one that got approved, and all the regulations approved in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see how that works its way through. They're sort of the guinea pig, so to speak, of working the system through. And so as they run into various issues on each build over the years, it's information that we can then give to the other states on here's how
Sure.
Colorado dealt with, for example, electrical hookups. When you have something movable, you don't want everything hardwired. There's other ways
Right,
of handling the wiring. That's just one example. And how to deal with different municipalities, everything from wildfire, problems, to snow loads, to out here in California, earthquakes and hurricanes in Florida. So we're dealing with all of these issues state by state.
So it sounds like this is a really great kind of partnership between grassroots participants, people like Vera and THIA, and then the local legislators. For anybody listening who thinks that they might, want to embark on this kind of thing, I know you've said in the past, get in touch. Are there any kind of training materials or things that you like people to kind of go through before they just start calling you?
Well, what's important is
Mm-hmm.
for $25, you can be a member of the Tiny Home Industry Association, and
Mm-hmm.
on there,
Mm-hmm.
there are webinars that I produced. One of them, which is about an hour, on how to work with your local officials to make change.
Okay.
It talks about some of the basics in terms of how do you approach your elected officials.
Yeah.
Preparing your elevator speech, going to the beer and hot dog fundraiser for your local council member, and how to buttonhole them and their, staffs. Because the key to success, every place where I've been successful in getting laws changed, like City of Los Angeles or City of San Diego, is because we had a very active local chapter there that knocked on doors and went to committee meetings and, found out who was tiny friendly. And then they brought me in. I can now go in and show them, okay, here's how you write it.
Right.
And here's how other cities have written it. And once they also know about my background in city management and county administration, they have a much more comfortable feeling that they're talking to a peer that, understands their language to help them work through dealing with the issues now from their constituents, versus me cold calling, someone in, Iowa isn't going to get it done.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm speaking of which, I'm kind of looking at the list of states: Washington, Oregon, Florida, New Hampshire, California, Maine. It seems like we're working around the edges. Is what states are next up?
Well, Colorado certainly, Massachusetts, Florida are very much in the mix of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having a national standard promulgated by ICC is going to help tremendously. Getting that done. Now I can sit down with the building commissions of each 50 states and show them. I say, hey, look, here's a standard. Here, this is a published standard. This is not some crazy thing that I came up with in my basement. This was put together by your peers nationally. All you need to do is adopt it.
Yeah.
And I think we will get a very good response to that, because, as I said earlier, our local building officials, they get calls every week on what about tiny homes? They so desperately want to have answers to that and ways of dealing with it.
Yeah.
It'll be very interesting to see how quickly this will take off once we have the standard.
Yeah. Now, is this a similar effort that will have to take place as to like basically after Appendix Q passed in 2018, basically like getting the states to adopt the latest version of the ICC code?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, and each
Yeah.
state, each municipality is different. We basically have three types of states,
Okay.
and there are states like California or New York or Virginia that they pass a statewide code that everyone follows. Virginia and California, for example, have made mandatory Appendix Q and Appendix AQ, right?
Mm.
Then you have states where, it's basically everything is up to local government to do.
Okay.
That's more like Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have states like Colorado that's half and half. Some abide by a statewide rule,
Okay.
and then there's other municipalities that go their own way, right? So having one standard written by ICC, which they all use, no matter their system, that they all use, now you can go down to City Hall with an actual, booklet and say, here's what needs to be adopted.
Got it. Well, that's fantastic. I'm curious, is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you kind of wanted to tell the audience? It's been a few years since you've been on the show, and I hope to have you back sooner than that. But yeah, any other updates to share?
Well, the Tiny Home Industry Association itself has grown and matured. We have 12 outstanding board members now from all over the United States, and a mix of folks
Nice.
that are builders and users and advocates, folks that are from the certification and inspection world,
yep,
that inspect and certify our units, and some folks now. We just put 2 members on that come from the world of creating tiny communities.
Nice.
For example, Will Johnson from MicroLife down in Atlanta area just joined. He's one of our new board members, as well as Abby Shank out of Pennsylvania, who does tiny home communities in different places around the country. So we're expanding into, this new growth area for tiny homes. Is not just building them and zoning, but working with communities on creating opportunities for infill cluster development, as well as tiny home communities, done in suburban or rural areas.
Awesome.
So our big focus the next coming years, besides finishing up the building code stuff, is really working hard on making the zoning codes more tiny friendly. And to that end, and bringing folks on like Abby and Will, is we're collecting ordinances. And if any of your listeners are familiar with something in their community where they passed an ordinance to allow infill tiny home development or other types of things, send me those ordinances. The more examples I have, the more I'm able to go and show a municipality, here's how Port Townsend did it in Washington, or here's how the city of Raleigh did infill cluster development, or here's how Clayton, Georgia, did the MicroLife, project. Because planners are very busy people, elected officials are very busy. If you can give them examples and actual written language on how others have done it and show them a pretty picture of here's what was built under this, it's worth its weight in gold. It helps us.
Excellent. Well, for anyone listening who knows of such ordinances, you heard Dan. Send them in. Yeah.
And in the meantime, go knock on doors of your local elected officials or anyone else at City Hall and talk to them about barriers to tiny home, living, and find out if there's folks that are willing to talk with us about changing their various laws, whether it's the building side or the zoning side.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a two-pronged approach.
What we need is 100 more Vera Strucks out there that help us, knock on legislator or council member or county commissioner, county supervisor's doors, and to talk the tiny talk.
Yeah, Well, I think we can both agree that Vera Struck is one of a kind, but we need people who are inspired by Vera who want to do the same work. Well, Dan Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for being back on the show. I can't wait to share this one and hope to have you back in a few months to talk about whatever comes next.
Yeah, be happy to.
Thank you so much to Dan Fitzpatrick for being a guest on the show once again. You can find the show notes, including a complete transcript, links to the resources Dan talked about, and much more at thetinyhouse.net/285. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/285. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.